You are listening to 95.7 FM WELT, Fort Wayne, Radioactive. The opinions and views expressed in this show are that of the hosts and guests only. They do not represent those of FreeThought Fort Wayne, Secular Fort Wayne, WELT, or any other organization. How can I live in society if I don't believe in God? How can I understand the world around me without religion? What can I do to make the world a better place? Where did we come from? How can I be a moral person? These are just some of the profound questions we as humans have pondered for millennia. Join us as we ponder these questions free from the ideologies of religion and superstition. Welcome to the Hoosier Humanist Hour, where we explore science, religion, culture, ethics, and community from the humanist perspective. I'm your host Andrew, and this is episode 5 of the Hoosier Humanist Hour. This episode is a conversation between D, Chris, and V. Take it away, gentlemen.
Are you guys okay talking about the difference between agnosticism and atheism? Do you like that topic or not?
It works. I mean, I can certainly say a few things about it. I don't know how much I can say, but...
Well, Christopher, I thought it was a good topic because I really enjoyed my conversation with you last Sunday about it. And I thought you brought up some really interesting ideas about the idea of God just being a bias that we have. Are you interested in talking more about that?
Yeah. Funny enough, I was actually reconfiguring my own radio show talk to kind of cover this topic to some degree at some point. But essentially, what I'd read in a book, funny enough, I never read, but I happened to look through this book that I was using to basically disguise my printed out text page that I had for my sister's wedding this past weekend, because I sure as hell was not going to wrap my ordination or the procession and other wedding things I was doing. I was not going to wrap that in a Bible by any means. So I wrapped it in this other book, which was a collection of philosophers of science. It basically had a bunch of bits and pieces from a bunch of famous philosophers on science. And one of these philosophers in particular was Francis Bacon. I thought it was very interesting because he said in book 1 of his Novum Organum, he actually started talking about this topic to some degree without necessarily directly delving into it. So he basically said that there are two extremes when it comes to knowledge. There is claiming that you know everything and therefore dismiss the further pursuit of knowledge entirely, or to where you strictly focus so much on the pursuit of knowledge that you don't really accept that any knowledge can be attained. So that is to say, you can either claim that you know everything, or claim that you know nothing, or claim somewhere in between. And he proposed what I propose, which is that you can have a happy medium. And how you get to that happy medium is through the scientific method, because you have this outline for gathering evidence, for inquiring about the universe, making predictions, and proving whether or not those predictions are false. And through that, you can gradually eliminate those things that are not true and support things that may or may not be true. But we can never assuredly prove larger concepts. We can just disprove those concepts that are incorrect. Because if we actually were to prove larger concepts, we would have to test every single possible variant on that topic, and that's just not possible. So we can accept that we don't know everything, and we can accept that we can know some things in the same sense, and that's okay. We don't have to sit here and say, oh, well, what about the possibility of a flying spaghetti monster orbiting the sun, kind of like what you were bringing up before. that's ridiculous. There's no reason for us to believe that. Therefore, there's no reason for us to even include that in discussion. And the fact that God has to enter so often into our discussions as a presupposed idea is ludicrous, because there's absolutely no reasoning for it. There's no logic for it. There's no evidence for it. And so just because we have no evidence against, per se, a flying spaghetti monster around the sun, because we've never observed such a thing, doesn't necessarily mean that exists. But it seems that science and the belief in a God are always at odds with each other. I don't understand all the time why that is.
So you're making more or less the argument that the idea of agnosticism is not really a valid point of view because well, just to paraphrase what you said, and tell me if I'm wrong here, the idea of believing in God is not built into us out of logic. It's built into us out of a bias, and but it doesn't make any sense, because we could also be biased to believe in the spaghetti monster orbiting the sun or something like that. Is that? But I don't know if that's a really good way of putting it, but I think that there's could be one hole in that, and that is, like, we seem to have some desire for a cause and effect relationship, so a first cause. And I don't know if science has really done a very good job with answering that question yet, and that really leads people to cling to the idea of a creator.
Right, and that's absolutely true, as far as the fact that one way to say that we are predisposed towards religion is to say that we were born with it, that's ingrained to us somehow. And it does seem to be true, because of the fact that when we start looking at the normal human condition, we see it as being highly prone towards religion. But if we look at people with certain brain disorders, or somehow lesser brain functioning, we start to see certain changes in that paradigm. So let's take autistic kids, for instance. If you have autism, you are much more likely to be atheist or agnostic than you are to be religious. And so that tells me that there is some place or some function in the brain that is responsible for this tendency towards needing a higher causal explanation than just science.
Well, let me chime in a little bit on that. So I think if we look at this in a historical perspective, I think religion was our first attempt at science.
Good point.
People didn't know where did the sun go at night. People didn't know what are stars. They look like little points of light in the sky. They didn't know why do we have earthquakes sometimes, volcanoes, things like that. So they postulated this God as a way to try to explain things. So it's our first attempt at science, and to actually quote Christopher Hitchens here, because it is our first, it is our worst. So I think people are very uncomfortable with not knowing things. That, sometimes we make up explanations like gods. And sometimes, it may not be just made up. I mean, certainly the arguments for God have some logical consistency to them. Now, they're completely unsubstantiated. There's, with the knowledge that we've gained over the last, millennia, we haven't uncovered a single shred of evidence for it, but that, they're not illogical in and of themselves. They're just unsubstantiated.
No, that's a really good point. How do you feel about do you feel like there is any evidence for a God at all, like, or any merit in believing that there could be one that exists with what you know about science now? I'm basically asking, like, how you feel about the idea of agnosticism versus atheism.
Well, so I mean, here's the thing. What is to agnosticism? To be a Gnostic means to know something, right? So I wouldn't claim to know that there is God, but I don't have any evidence for it. Therefore, I don't believe that there is one. So belief and knowledge kind of play together. You can believe and know some things at the same time, but you can say that you believe that same thing, but you don't really know it. So it's a degree of certainty that's the difference between belief and knowledge. So knowledge is a subset of belief, kind of thing. So you can have agnostic atheists, you can have agnostic theists, you can have Gnostic atheists and Gnostic theists. So it just goes towards the degree of certainty you have in the conclusion.
We would never say, most of the time I hear the word agnostic used, it's in conjunction to an idea of God. But could you be agnostic about lettuce on the moon too?
Well, again,
lettuce growing on the moon. I mean, we haven't searched every part of the moon to know that there's no lettuce growing on the moon, but I suppose it could be possible. Maybe there's a glass jar with the perfect little plot of earth preserved from some eons past, and there's still lettuce growing underneath it.
Now, see, that's exactly what Francis Bacon was talking about. Was taking that step too far. Yeah, as far as wondering the ludicrous that has absolutely no evidence supporting it. As far as lettuce on the moon or like a plesiosaur in my grandma's pond. I mean, I haven't been down there, but I'm pretty sure there's not one down there. So
right.
There's no reason for me to presuppose that unless I have this idea planted in my mind beforehand, some a priori assumption that leads me to believe that, oh, well, my great-grandmother grew up a plesiosaur from a baby, and so there's actually one at the bottom. You just have to reach the bottom to see it, and nobody's ever been to the bottom, so clearly it exists. We just haven't seen it yet. That's a bit ridiculous. So
well, your grandma may be, secretly have studied biology and how to clone things, and found a dinosaur egg, extracted the DNA, injected it into a crocodile egg cell, and now we have a nice little plesiosaurus. I mean, that is not impossible.
I know. So, I was going to agree with Christopher Vess, and now you just convinced me that I might be wrong.
No, that's a great idea for a movie. I think I'll name it Jurassic Indiana.
Yeah, I don't know where I got the idea from, really.
Well, I think we're in a culture, and even the world is so biased toward the idea of God, that God exists, that even if you come out of it, you still want to retain the idea that maybe it's possible, just because you've been presented to the idea for so long, even if you're not religious. And when you think about God, and generally from a purely logical standpoint, I'm sure many of our listeners will totally disagree, he just isn't proven to be there, and it's kind of ridiculous. I could never imagine coming up with the idea of God if I were never exposed to it prior by something, at least at this point. I'm all speculating on all this here, so.
As I was saying, I think the idea of God came up as our first attempt at science.
Yes.
But I think what it has grown into, because children are indoctrinated into these views and religions and all that, it has become what Chris was saying, an a priori assumption You just assume that it's there. You've grown up with that idea. You don't know anything else. There are certain, gaps in the scientific knowledge, and it's really easy to stuff God into those as just an assumption because you grew up with it. It's comfortable and makes you happy and all that.
Yeah. Well, Christopher, I think you've convinced me that I don't buy agnosticism anymore as a valid view for myself. You've changed my mind with your ideas.
I guess I would approach agnosticism kind of in a similar fashion to the way that I approach atheism, in that you have different flavors of it.
Yeah.
So I perceive at least two different flavors of agnosticism, because I see one being a position where a person is like, well, I don't know enough about the science to really be able to say, so I'm just going to say I don't know for now.
Yeah.
Whereas the other extreme is the one that we just talked about, where they're like, oh, well, we can't possibly know anything in the universe. I don't even know if gravity is going to be true 5 seconds from now, so I'm going to drop this bag of Raisinets and maybe it'll fall into the floor. I don't know.
That's wonderful points. They're wonderful points. I'm really just fascinated by how much I am even biased to that idea, and you've pointed it out to me over the last few days, just from our initial conversation, and I'm able to see through it now. But I speak only for myself. I don't know everybody else's answer for themselves. So, but I feel pretty confident.
I would go on to say that that atheism, from what I've seen and experienced, also has two sides of it, at least, to where you have one side that is based on your scientific knowledge and understanding that tells you, hey, the natural world is the natural world, and there's no room or need for any supernatural deity. The other end of the spectrum is having somebody who was indoctrinated, who just believes in atheism without having any real reason to believe it. And I see that as being an equally large problem to bring up, as far as, finding community among fellow atheists is fine, but I would just hope that, I guess, those atheists have a good reason to be atheist, because I don't want to create another religion kind of scenario where you're just believing to believe.
Well, that's what I'm most curious about in the future, is whether or not that's what will happen, because I do believe the traditional Abrahamic religions are on their way out. That may take a century or who knows how long, but are we just going to replace it with atheism, the religion?
I certainly hope not. I mean, Chris, you're completely right. You can be an atheist for good reasons and for bad reasons. The good reasons are to be an atheist for, some, is a rational consequence of your experience and knowledge and all that. The bad ones are to turn into another religion in and of itself. I am very much against that. But that same thing is very much valid on the other side. With theists, you could be a theist for good reasons and for bad reasons. If you just believe it just because, that would be a bad reason. But I suppose someone could have had experiences that they find convincing. Now, many of those wouldn't be convincing to anyone else, but for themselves, it may be a rational stand that a certain few people are taking when they, choose to be a theist.
V, I had a quick question for you based upon what you were last talking about, whether or not atheism will become a religion and our views on that. And that requires people to actually take an interest in understanding why. And I'm sometimes blown away by how few people do that. And I just am curious what your perspective is. Do you think more people will choose to enlighten themselves as to why, or do you think the majority of people, and I don't know if this is the truth, I'm overstating, are just going to take it for their parents' word for it.
I think actually people won't have a choice but to enlighten themselves. I think, with the internet and with smartphones and 24/7 being plugged into the biggest conglomerate of knowledge called the internet that has ever existed in history, I think people won't have a choice but to gain the knowledge. I mean, you have to force yourself to separate from that knowledge base, I think. And it won't be a quick transition, but I think people will gain the knowledge. They'll see, where the evidence lies. And I think once there's a little bit of a critical mass, and it becomes a little more safer for atheists, agnostic, humanists, free thinkers to speak up, to discuss their ideas and their views without, fear of being ostracized. And I think once that happens, I think a lot of people will drop their beliefs, or their beliefs will get so muddied and watered down that it would really make no difference, whether you're a theist or an atheist.
I hope you're right.
I mean, it's been said, the internet is the place where religion comes to die.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I would give it a lot of credit for my own personal story. Without it, I don't think I ever would have woke up.
I mean, imagine like 10, 20 years ago, if you wanted to gain the knowledge that is readily available at your fingertips right now, you'd have to go to a library, you'd have to research things, you have to go, look at books and magazines and journals and read articles and this and that, where now you can go to a web page, a trusted, web page, and that's the key word there, is to find a trusted source, someone that's not biased, that is just going to give you the information the way it is. Now you can do that in seconds. Now, of course, because anybody can write anything on the internet, it complicates things. You have unreliable sources. You have something like Wikipedia that anybody can edit. So it may be a good starting place to do some research, but I would never take anything on Wikipedia for the actual truth. You'd always want to double check with other sources and more trusted sources of information. But it's a lot easier these days. It's a lot easier.
Yeah. Agreed. I get excited about some of, like Watson was that computer that IBM made that could beat everybody at Jeopardy a few years ago, and they're really trying to take that software and technology and push it. And eventually, I think Watson will be like the Siri is now, where we'll be able to ask a computer basically any question and get the synopsis of it, like right back at us on demand. Like even that'll be revolutionary again.
Well, actually, it's not just chess. They just announced it. Have you guys heard of a game called Go?
Oh, yeah.
So that's a Chinese game, and you have just black and white pieces, and I don't know exactly how the game plays, but it's on a square board, and the number of permutations is just incredible. So you can't do brute force, kind of a strategy like you would in chess, where the computer analyzes every single possible outcome and decides, what move to make. Right. In this game, you can't do that. So they use like deep learning and things like that. And they beat the world champion of that game just today or a couple of days ago or something like that.
Yeah, I think it was not too long ago, like a week or so. I remember reading that article.
It's been within a few days, yeah.
Apparently, I didn't realize that was such a big feat to accomplish, but they were pretty excited about it.
Yeah, the reason why it is a big feat is because you can't do a brute force approach. You can't analyze every single possible scenario from here until the end of the game to decide on
Right.
which one of your potential next actions, will give you the most benefit. I mean, it's absolutely impossible to do that with the game of Go. So that's where, computer learning and all that kind of stuff has been used.
Yeah, they've definitely been talking more about deep learning lately,
Yeah.
and having multiple levels of comprehension and cross-referencing available. I think they were talking about maybe how search engines work, or maybe how certain face detection technologies work, and commenting on how they're generally only about 4 layers deep, if I remember correctly. And they've been working on one and having some success with one that is 11 layers deep, which adds a level of precision and complexity never before seen in AI essentially before. So it's pretty promising what they're doing.
Can either one of you guys, or you, Andrew, give me a good definition of deep learning? I understand the concept, but for our listeners, anybody feel comfortable defining that?
I don't know if I can do it very well, but it basically, it really is like the way humans learn through experience. You're fed a certain base amount of information, but you build on top of that yourself. But one thing that's cool about computers is, let's say you have 10 computers, and all 10 of these computers have been using these learning algorithms to figure out, how the world works. What are the results if you do different things? If you have 10 of them, they can combine their knowledge really easily, where you can't do that with people. For a person, it's always sequential. You learn this thing, and then you learn the next thing. And to learn something, you have to learn it for yourself. You have to read the book, or you have to listen to the professor, or something like that. Where a computer can learn, independently from another computer, and then they can combine that knowledge together, which is very powerful.
Heck yeah. I think the first time I had heard of it, Google had just acquired a company a few years ago called DeepMind, maybe. And I think they developed a program that allowed them to play old Atari games and learn how to play the game by itself and maximize its score. And so the program just learned how to play all these old games, and it learned all these tricks in the game that other people had never even heard of, just to maximize its score. Wow. And I thought that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, you just gotta. That's the thing about a computer. It doesn't get tired, doesn't get distracted, doesn't have to sleep, it doesn't have to eat. It just has a singular purpose, and you just got to give it, a base number of tools to work with, and then just let it go. I think Google is actually using something very similar in their self-driving cars, where those cars are learning how to behave on the roads as they're going. They have a certain base amount of knowledge, and from that point on, they're
making choices almost.
Yeah, they're making choices, and they're learning, they're observing, going through different situations. And that's one thing that they were actually talking about, is that they are combining the knowledge of all these different cars. They're putting all that together, so that if they have 10 cars and each one drove 1,000 miles, it's as if it's as if all of them drove 10,000 miles, because they can share that knowledge instantly.
That's amazing. Did anybody see the video from Boston Dynamics, their new Atlas robot, which I highly recommend to any listeners out there who haven't seen it? It's basically the cutting edge of robotics, humanoid robotics. This is their newest version of Atlas, and it's crazy what it can do.
Yeah, for those that haven't seen it, I saw the video. It shows a robot picking up a box, and there's a person with a hockey stick that hits the box and the box falls down, so the robot has to pick it up again, or the person with the stick just pushes the robot. And there's a couple of videos where they kick the robots and do all this. And as somebody was saying, when the robots rise, this will be the first guy that gets killed.
Right, I know. Well, I was really impressed with the robot's ability to walk on uneven, slippery ground and not fall. I was like,
it's
wow,
impressive.
Very impressive. The world's going to change in the next 20 years, everybody. Get prepared.
It will change in ways that we don't even anticipate. People back in the 90s, if you told them that you're going to have, imagine in 1990, someone telling you that you're going to have an iPhone in your pocket, you'd have told them they're crazy.
Right.
You'd have told them they're absolutely nuts. If you wanted to pay for it, you can have 100 megabit or even faster, internet connection to your apartment. That was absolutely out of the question in the early 90s. So I think the world is changing so fast. It'll be unrecognizable what we have in just 20, 30 years.
Oh, yeah. Maybe even 10. You ever look at a movie that came out in 2004 or 2006 and look at the technology they're using then? You're like, wow. Like the programs like Napster and all the stuff we used to use back then.
Well, what's even funnier was someone put a scanned copy of the weekly, monthly ads that Radio Shack used to, send in people's mail and whatever, and it had a cassette player, had some other electronics and cameras and all this stuff. A whole page full of different electronics, and right next to that picture, they put a picture of a smartphone today, and like everything that used to be in that one page is now in the palm of your hand. You couldn't carry all those electronics all at once, but now it's the size of something you carry in your hand, and it can do so much more than all those.
Yeah,
so
it's gonna be exciting.
Technology is going to revolutionize the world.
What is?
Technology is going to revolutionize the world.
Oh, yeah.
Even further than it already has. It already has, but much further than where it is.
This is
That's why it astounds.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, please go ahead. I'm talking way too much. Go for it.
No. I was just saying that that's why it astounds me as far as why we're at the height of our technology, and yet it seems we're also at the height, at least in recent past, of our science denial, as far as being a little overly skeptical and critical of scientific advancements in the previous century or a couple, as far as being anti-vaccine. Who would even imagine that being such a huge issue in today's technologically advanced society? Why would that even be a question?
I know.
It's like
I've asked myself many times that very same question, like, why is that happening? What is behind the anti-vaxxers, the homeopaths, all this stuff? It's crazy to me.
The global warming, yeah. That's the same thing.
Global warming denial.
All this is science. It's the same science that you are putting in your pocket, that you are accessing every day, all day. It's the same science. There is no two different kinds of science.
I know. And that's what scares me about humanity. Like, how is it so hard? We talk about atheism not becoming a religion. People will understand and do things, but or make their decisions based on rational thought. But like, why isn't it happening now? And what makes me think that it's going to change all of a sudden?
But honestly, part of it goes back to what V was kind of mentioning, as far as people being able to put information online, funny enough, and in print, and on the news, and having been said by politicians and celebrities, all this crap. It's just crap. It's like, okay, well, this MD chooses to make a website that is talking about the beneficial effects of some root found in the South American jungle. And somehow that actually means something. When they cite no studies, when they basically just sit here and say, hey, buy my product and you'll become awesome and cancer-free and stuff.
Right.
Like, oh, okay. And I should listen to you because you have an MD. Okay, right. I got it.
Money talks, even if you're a doctor.
Well, but that's the thing, people see that title, oh, he's a doctor, he must know more than I do. And, they have that authority over you, and so people buy it. I think there's an inherent suspicion in some people of the establishment, of the fact that, maybe they're being manipulated or something like that. And, so they fall for that kind of nonsense. There's some nostalgia about the past and how pure the past was. And, but, people lived back then, and, they didn't take all these drugs, and why can't we?
Right. Yeah. I never understood that, because it's like, do you happen to forget the state of human beings back then?
I know.
Our average lifespan was 35 years old. You would most likely die at birth and or kill your mother. So I don't think it's a good time to go back to, actually. I like having an average lifespan of 80 years.
Yeah,
that's absolutely true. But even people that, they were around in the 60s, they're still around, they remember that time. And I mean, it was their youthful years. It was their childhood. They were happy. They were all this, and now they're older. They're beat down by life, and they don't remember all the bad things that were going on back then. But they remember the good things, and, our brains rationalize all that stuff with incredible speed and sometimes just crazy results.
I was listening to a political ad, and it was some woman, waxing about the how good the 90s were, and how can we get back to like the values of the 90s or something like that.
Yeah, like
that was only 20 years ago.
And, all these other things. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I agree with you though. It's we get nostalgic about the better times of the 60s, or when we were more innocent.
Oh yes.
Yeah, no, it's great always waking up every day and wondering if an atomic bomb is going to drop on your head. I mean, it's yeah.
No thanks.
Nostalgia. Yeah.
Well, when you think, I was talking to my wife the other day about this very topic, and we were thinking, being paranoid almost never pays off, but it does pay off one time, and it's in the really drastic situations, it's the paranoid who survive. So I just think that's why that's so ingrained in humanity.
And the one time
because
that
it's
it
only
pays
been
off,
the paranoid who survive.
But the one time that it pays off, it reinforces all the other paranoias that you've been wrong about.
And then in the event that it's like a really bad situation and a large portion of the population dies, and the paranoid survive, well, you just have evolution, more or less. We become more paranoid.
Well, that's kind of the zombie movement, right? So all these people are doing all these zombie preparedness activities, having zombie survival kits and zombie shelters. It sucks. It sucks having to be that paranoid for that reason. But honestly, some of those things that they're doing are great, just general disaster preparedness measures. They're great disease preventing measures. So that's the sad part, is that the root cause of it is wrong, but the side effects are good.
I know.
I mean, it's really not funny. Unreasonable to have a disease outbreak, or the Yellowstone volcano blowing. It's not going to be zombies, but those are the people that are going to survive, and they're completely irrational. But
they're going to survive.
Yeah.
This is all the product of The Walking Dead, huh?
That's a great show.
I love that show too, but I never thought once about preparing for a zombie apocalypse. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, but even, something like that could even help people in the case of like what's happening in Flint, where all their water is now lead contaminated. And if you were, preparing for something like that, maybe you have 7,000 gallons of water stashed somewhere, which is literally a drop of the bucket. Nobody would ever know. It is some vessel that sits out there, but now you have water for 2 years,
That's when you sell it for a premium, V.
There you go.
You make your money and move to California where the water's better.
No, they have a drop. They have no water there.
That's right. I was. Does anybody have another topic they want to talk about? Because I have one that I was interested in.
Go ahead.
That article you mentioned from FreeThought that I can't look, but the 7 habits of, what was that article?
The 7 facts about atheists.
Oh, 7 facts?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought it was 7 habits.
No. Well, there was, let's see, the 7 facts. There was the Idaho bill that would allow the Bible to be taught in classes. Which one of these do we want to tackle? There's the strip club.
Ooh, strip club. What was that one?
So basically, I guess it's in Lafayette, Indiana. A church has moved right next door to a strip club in the same plaza, and it's going to be an interesting cohabitation there.
Yes, that will be good. Then you can go to the strip club all night and then go to church in the morning.
I mean, you don't even have to leave the strip club.
I know.
From one straight to the other. You just take a little nap outside in the car, and you're good to go.
All you need is
confess your sins in the morning.
All you need is like a 24-hour Euro restaurant between the two, and you're good to go.
Well, there should be some restaurants around. I mean, some kind of shopping plaza or something. So,
Waffle House. That's what you need.
Oh,
you need a Waffle House in the same plaza, and you'd never have to leave.
Works for me. Oh man, I don't know how did they decide on that location? That just sounds crazy to me.
Maybe they're going to protest a bunch.
Well, they said they're not looking for a conflict, so and there's some kind of privacy fence around the strip club that doesn't allow much to be seen inside. So
I guess the price was right for one of them.
That was one of the things that they were talking about, was the price. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I guess they had a concern that you'd have, and that's a quote, you have drunk, horny men coming out of there. So they're worried about that, I guess. I don't know why would the church and the strip club be open at the same time, but
you could just see some drunk guy coming into the church. Oh, sorry, wrong spot.
Oh, wrong place. Well, I guess, you guys said that there was like Wednesday evening services or something at some churches. So they may be open at the same time.
Yeah.
Oh, man. I don't know. Just funny.
So I'm foreseeing the strip club benefiting more from this arrangement than the church, actually.
Totally.
Being able to monopolize on the Wednesday night pastor special. I think that's pretty cool.
Pastor special. No. You know what? The strip club should give discounts for the members of the church. Should get it without paying to enter. Or something.
Oh yeah. Our neighbors come in free.
Exactly.
Just trying to be neighborly.
Wanting to play nice with your neighbor, that's
right.
Oh man, that's pretty awesome.
Okay, we need another intriguing topic.
Okay, how about the Idaho bill?
What's the Idaho? V, tell us about the Idaho bill.
Okay, so I'm going to read from this article on patios. So part of what's in this law says the Bible is expressly permitted to be used in Idaho public schools for reference purposes to further the study of literature, comparative religion, English and foreign languages, United States and world history, comparative government, law, philosophy, ethics, astronomy, biology, geology, world geography, archaeology, music, sociology, and other topics of study where an understanding of the Bible may be useful or relevant. No student will be required to use any religious text for reference purposes if the student or parent of the student objects.
Well, I mean, I was on board with the first half of that list.
Yeah, no, it's totally fine. You know, there are some legit classes there, but man, astronomy, really?
Yeah, I know. This is before they knew what those lights in the sky were. Oh, wow.
Isn't there a prophecy in Exodus that when the second coming comes, like the stars are going to fall out of the sky? No. What book? No,
that's Revelation.
Revelations, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was taught that the Bible was actually written in the stars.
Oh.
Prior to the Bible being written in whatever language it was originally written in. So it's basically existed forever. And that's how man could still understand God before the Bible, was they could read the stars.
Wow. Are like the constellations the letters or something?
Well, we basically can't understand it anymore. We've lost a lot of this knowledge conveniently. But the constellations were meant to signify certain parts of the Bible. So, like, I can't even remember much of it. Like Aquarius, that would be like Jesus Christ, ushering in a different age, spiritual age. Dang it, I'm doing a really terrible job of proving my point here.
No, it's interesting because I just thought Aquarius would have been flooding the earth. Water?
Yeah, maybe. well, here's one. There's the story of Moses bringing down the tablets, right? And then he finds the Ten Commandments, and he finds his people basically making a calf, right? Well, the golden calf. Well, that is actually was supposed to be representative of what's the constellation of the bull? Taurus. And basically the sun makes a path through these apparently over time, well, at least the way we see it, about every 2,000 years. So apparently the sun was going into a different age or a different path in the sky at the time, and it was signifying the age of Taurus. And then you have Jesus with the water, Aquarius, issuing in another timeline of God's plan. So I'm not giving it a very good synopsis, but I think you guys get the idea of what I'm talking about.
Well, it just demonstrates that, the Bible has nothing to say about astronomy that's of any relevance.
Yeah, none whatsoever.
None
whatsoever. Well, the thing that I always got a kick out of that teaching is that you can't see all the stars. Like if you're on the northern hemisphere, you can't see the stars that you would see in the southern hemisphere. So you never had a complete picture of the Bible, even if you could read the stars.
Yeah, no, it's very true. Very true. How about biology? I mean, does the Bible say anything good on biology? Were you taught anything? Be fruitful, multiply?
Yes. We'll see how far we take that as a species, right?
Well, it pretty far.
It had some very interesting views on biology, which was why just reading the first few passages of Genesis, where it talks about all the creatures. Now, granted, it's been translated, and I'm aware of that sometimes errors come from translation, but even when you go to the original terms and what they exactly mean, it still essentially means what the translation says, and more often than not. So it's cool when you sit here and see the Bible saying, hey, you have flying things like birds and bats. They're just like each other, just like fish and dolphins are just like each other. And you're like, I'm pretty sure those are very, very different in modern biology, actually. Bats are mammals, not birds. Dolphins are mammals, not fish. So you have some problems, significant problems. Especially when you go to look at, was Eve just a rib of Adam? No, of course she wasn't. That's crazy. That's stupid to think that. Like, how can one part of one thing all of a sudden transform into something that's very, very similar, but just different by a few genes and one chromosome? That just doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, when you postulate the magic man in the sky, anything is possible.
Yeah, it all makes sense from there. Well,
but go ahead.
I was going to say, as a person coming out of deep religion and believing a lot of this stuff, when I learned about the fossil record, and actually there's, I have not actually seen if this is true or not, but apparently if you go to Las Vegas, you can take a helicopter ride out to the Grand Canyon and land down there. It's it's a pretty posh trip. It's like $400 or $500 a person to do it. But, they'll give you a tour, and apparently if you go down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, as you're going down, you can see the different periods of the Earth, and you can see the fossil records, and you keep going down, and you go down far enough, and there's no more fossils. And you can actually see the evolution of animals in the layers over time. Man, that is overwhelming evidence against the first part of Genesis. So when I learned that, I just was like, and yet, I'm so dumb. I grew up so dumb.
No, it's great. That's great that you bring that up, though, because honestly, I've heard a lot of people argue for the Grand Canyon as being evidence of the worldwide flood.
Yes.
And that as the waters receded from the flood, that's when they gouged out that canyon. And then you have people who go down into the canyon and actually look at its walls and look at that. They see exactly what you just described.
Yeah. How cool is that, though?
Yeah.
I mean, but that's another.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say you can see how the river carved through the canyon. I mean, it's obvious when you look at it. And you would have very different the layers of fossils if all those animals died all at the same time.
Yeah.
They'd be all in the same narrow layer, not spread through the rock like they are.
And that's what's cool about looking at the dinosaurs, just because we can see a very, very definitive layer where majority of them died instantaneously. And that layer is coated with a little bit of dusting of iridium, which is found where? In meteorites.
What? You broke up
iridium.
A little bit. What'd you say? Iridium, okay.
Iridium, yeah.
Oh, interesting. So, and that proves that it more than likely was a asteroid that hit us.
Right.
Because it went into the atmosphere and made a nice little layer over everything. Oh, it's very interesting.
Yeah. You can see the same thing in ice cores and things like that. Like when scientists drill into the Arctic or Antarctica and they pull out the ice cores, when they open them up, you can see different colored bands. And they have ways to figure out, what length of time does each layer represent, and they can figure out what the climate was. They can figure out a lot of different things just from looking at that ice.
So, and kind of getting at one of the things I talked to Dee about was just looking at how all these different fields of science tend to agree with one another to some degree. And that's extraordinary because, as I alluded to before, scientists like to disprove each other and one another. And they especially despise people outside of their field generally. So they really want to show something novel, to prove everyone else wrong and prove themselves right. And somehow we see very good agreement, actually, with regards to a lot of these things across disciplines, whether it be geology or hydrology or evolution. They all agree.
Physics, astronomy, they all converge when you look at the data. Yeah, it's absolutely true.
Agreed. I used to be intimidated by the data. Like I couldn't get my head around it. And that was a long time ago. I've come a long way from that. But I think the internet's allowed that. Just a natural curiosity. There's so much knowledge out there. If you just open your eyes and look at it, it leads you in a direction that you never would have thought. If you grew up
and you gotta
religious.
Imagine when you watch something like Cosmos or some other documentary like that summarizes all that knowledge, that's based on years and years of research. And what goes into one of those episodes, if you want to look at it in details, you can write volumes on that. You can write whole encyclopedias on each one of those topics probably. So there's a lot more behind, a lot more detail than people realize, than I can probably imagine.
Yeah. And history became really interesting to me when I started to look at it from the point of view of humanity emerging from superstition. For instance, Galileo looks up into these stars and the moon, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, that's a planet with moons going around it." Like, how shocking is that, and how revolutionary that. I just can't imagine. He probably didn't sleep for days. I wouldn't have been able to. Like, whoa. Like,
yeah.
Are we a planet too? And that's what the moons are? Are all these stars just planets everywhere? I mean, that is absolutely shocking stuff that I do not think that most students get a real appreciation for, because they don't have a really good idea of the story of humanity coming out of ignorance.
Imagine the courage it took for him to see that stuff and admit to himself, having been taught all his life that he's unique, that he's God's creature, that, the earth is flat, and that, all these dots in the sky are just little dots that God put up there. They're nothing more than just some lights. And for him to see and to follow what he sees, to have the courage to voice that, I think that took a lot. I think it took a lot of courage in those years to say that and to stand up to the church and to everybody else.
Yeah. Especially getting burned at the stake being a possible punishment. I don't know if I would have been bold enough.
I probably wouldn't have been.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate to see a man like him 1,800 years ago first discover that, hey, bodies in space are round. They are spherical to some degree. And then now we have somehow a resurgence of this flat Earth nonsense.
Yeah.
Just blows my mind.
Right. Well, we're still waking up. That was only like 450 years ago. I mean, when you're a kid, 450 years seems like an eternity, but I'm closing in on 40 here, and I'm like, that's not that long, man. That's not that long ago. And then, just recently in my lifetime, the idea that all the stars had planets orbiting around them like ours was relatively new concept to me, just within really the last 10, 15 years. And then you're just like, that's even more mind-blowing that you're just one of those planets.
Yeah. We've just almost been ingrained with this idea that we're so special.
Yeah.
We're so special. This planet that we're on is so special. And it's like, we found how many Earths now? Earth-like planets? Yeah, a lot.
We've barely even begun to look.
Right.
Yeah.
So, all this, and the argument as to the Idaho argument as to why the Bible was probably a faulty book for study.
Very much so.
That is all the time we have for you this week. This has been the Hoosier Humanist Hour. Be sure to check out FreeThought Fort Wayne on Facebook and Secular Fort Wayne on Meetup.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope your days are filled with logic, reasoning, and the eternal quest for knowledge.